what can President Biden do? What should he do? What will he do?
Well, there's not much he can do. Obviously, everybody's talking about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which always comes up when prices are high. Obviously, President Biden has been in Washington a long time and knows that high gasoline prices are not good for incumbents. And he's jawboning OPEC Plus. But the one thing that's been left out of the discussion, he's actually president of the country that is the world's largest oil producer, and there seems to be no dialogue between the administration and the oil industry. And, you know, the rest of the world is saying this is really strange. The U.S. is not importing 60% of its oil. The U.S. is basically independent.
Right. Why?
Well, I think there's a basic antagonism and lack of interest, indifference to the industry, although it has 10.5 million people work in it. But, you know, they call it the Glenn Youngkin factor. They're obviously worried about 2022, and people do vote their wallets.
Dan, it's Guy in London. Is the president looking in the wrong direction? He's talking about OPEC Plus, which does include Russia. But nevertheless, I'm wondering whether or not actually what we're seeing in energy markets right now is a broader reaction to Russia's apparent decision to keep its cards close to its chest when it comes to supplying Europe with gas. The implication of that is that it bleeds out into the rest of the energy space, and generally energy has gone higher.
Well, Guy, this really, I think, really started in China, which its economy was going overdrive with the pandemic, and then coming out of the pandemic, coal became short supply, LNG became short supply, so gas that was going to Europe ended up going to China. And then Russia's sitting there, but, you know, when we do our numbers, we don't see that Russia has a great deal more gas to put in, because they've been putting gas into their storage for winter because their inventories have been low. Europe's inventories are low. So marginally, Russia could do more, but this really has to do with the fact that this is an energy crisis that didn't begin with oil, but it began with coal and LNG. So
do you think that we could ever see a gas crisis like here in the U.S.? I keep hearing how we're exporting so much LNG. Some of those terminals are running like full tilt. Do we get a gas crisis here? Well, I don't think we get a gas crisis because, I mean, our prices are up, and it's up because these inventories have to be filled, and, of course, the winter. The other thing, the U.S. has lots of natural gas. What we have a shortage of is pipelines to move the gas. Which, again, brings us back to D.C. Yes, it's back to politics. Yeah. Do you think the administration or politicians are getting the right message? Well, I think that that the opposition to new pipelines is pretty strong, and I don't see that changing. But I think that also as production starts to increase in the Permian, down in Texas and in New Mexico, there's associated gas, which will also come out. So I think in the U.S. this is more of a winter problem. Oil prices are responding both to the general crisis that's out there, and at the same time, the fundamentals do start to get tighter as you move over the next couple of years because of lack of investment. I'll just mention some of the OPEC countries can't even meet their quotas because they haven't been spending money on maintenance, and their systems are not working as well as they can.
Dan, last week was about COP in Glasgow and rising energy prices around the world. Is this something we're just going to have to get used to, that energy volatility is going to become part and parcel of the energy transition as we move away from fossil fuels?
Guy, that's a very important question, and I think it's a question, is this a one-off that we're seeing, or are we going to see a series of shocks because of what we might call preemptive underinvestment that's not synchronized with the growth of alternatives? And I think there's some, and I know some prominent Europeans are starting to warn, if we have recurrent crises like these, there'll be a pullback. I mean, you saw Britain says we want to get off coal, and what are they doing? They're burning coal at a plant that was supposed to be shut down because they need it for electricity. So where do you think the balance of power will lie now? I mean, if it's been Saudi Arabia with oil for so long, and then it tilted to the U.S., which feels like a flash in the pan, like who's going to hold the power in the energy market, in the energy transition? Well, if we look at oil, I think certainly OPEC Plus has been a balancer. But what's underestimated, and in a sense we're not hearing this from Washington, what's brought energy security generally has been the growth of U.S. energy supply. That's why when we've had crises, like a serious attack on oil facilities in 2019, it did nothing to price because the U.S. is there, and the U.S. is actually a bulwark of energy security.
Dan, when I think about what happens next. And looking at the United States, it's going to be fascinating to see ultimately whether the government does change its sort of tune on hydrocarbons, at least in the short term, and help out the energy sector. But in the longer term, there is clearly huge amounts of money that are going to shift away from investing in hydrocarbons to investing in sustainability. At the moment, it seems it is slightly an unguided missile in as much as we're just investing in everything. When do we start to figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work, and understand what the long-term energy picture is going to look like?
Well, I think we're in a period of great experimentation going on right now. You know, they committed to $130 trillion of investment in sustainability in Glasgow. But is it going to be hydrogen, role of carbon capture, how much more it's going to happen with wind and so forth? So I think a lot of money is going to go in a lot of direction until it becomes clear, until we see what's really working.
Last question then. Are you hearing an echo in your ear too? Okay, this will be fun. So last question on that. I guess if there was one thing you think that would incentivize oil producers right now, or natural gas producers, to produce more when their shareholders actively don't want them to, short term, what could that be realistically?
Well, I think it is going to be price. I mean, we actually think next year U.S. oil production could go up by as much as 800,000 barrels a day.
So the price signal will work? The
price signal will work. We're seeing it working with the privates. The companies are still being cautious because there's this second shale revolution, which is a relationship with investors. But I think as there's money to return to investors, we'll see it go up. But we're not going to see it go crazy, I think. So I think that's the direction. But things take time. I think really the critical period now is the next couple of months this winter. If it's a cold winter, the pressures will increase.